cloud. Perfect. Okay, we're going to get started and we're going to get stuck in. So thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar on steady state and technical coxing versus pieces and race day. There's a little link here for the Buy Me a Coffee page. If you think we say anything useful, drop us on there. You can buy us a coffee. And if you don't want to, that's also totally fine. So first things first from us. There are specific skills and there's very subtle differences required to cox during steady state, during technical sessions, during pieces, and during racing. And there's going to be a little bit of overlap and a little bit of segmentation in what those skills are. And the idea is that we're going to be able to tell you throughout this session, and by the end of this, you'll know what those sort of key things are. And I think try and think about this with almost an open mind, but also quite a logical mind. And you'll see how that feeds in as we go through. So first of all, what do we mean by each of the different types of sessions or training sessions or race scenarios that we mean? So a steady session is something where it's usually a longer duration. There's not really going to be any bits of work or bursts, that sort of thing in it. So it might be at lower rates, usually less than 20 strokes per minute. It will be in a zone 2 heart rate, which is quite a low heart rate. It might be, that's very specific depending on the individual. Say if I was to say to you it's going to be about 150 beats per minute, that might only be relevant to me. So when I say zone 2 heart rate, that's a zone in which you could work out what your heart rate is specifically to you. You can have those kind of metrics. If you've got a heart rate watch, you can do a 220 minus your rage, and then there's a certain percentage, so kind of like 50 to 60% of heart rate max is going to give you that zone. I may be wrong there, so maybe fact check that one. I've just sort of thought about that. And sometimes in things like the GB rowing team, they would use lactate analysis. So they're typically less than 2 millimoles of lactic acid would be how they might measure a steady state rowing session. For people who don't have that measures, that might be a rating of perceived exertion where you're able to talk and not chit chat like I am to you now, but you're able to string together a complete sentence without being too breathy or too exhausted, or it might be something like 1/2 to 3/4 pressure. They're normally relatively long sessions, and this varies depending on the level at which you're at. So that could be 4 kilometers if you're just starting out. It might be all the way up to 20 kilometers if you're a more experienced rower, a rower on the national team, something like that. So a lot of programs might do something like between 8 and 16K as their steady rows. And we would normally break that down into sections. So it might be like a 2K warm-up. You might then do a set distance of rowing and a cool down. And we'll go into a little bit more detail within that later. These sessions are trying to create the real long-term adaptations within the body. So trying to increase your lung capacity, you want that capillarization, those sort of things that we're looking for. So you've got to do the long, steady miles. A tech session is a little bit of steady rowing, but it has drills brought into it. So again, it could be between 4K and maybe 12K. You might, on some programs, they might say something like, we're going to do 16 kilometers with some tech. That's all program dependent. Other programs might say, we're going to do 4K of tech and not much steady, continuous rowing. And when I say tech, that's drills that are very specifically linked to a clear objective, a clear aim for that session. So that might be to improve your catches or to cover the blade quicker. It might be to be able to complete the stroke at the finish. Whatever that is, each tech session should have a very clear objective, and then how you operate within that session is based and built upon around that. Pieces, you'll see a bit of a common theme here. They're going to incorporate elements of steady and tech, and it's also going to have elements of kind of work elements that are a lot like racing. And the idea here is that we're actually practicing components and elements of what we would do on race day. So the steady and technical elements are built into the warm-up, and that's to get you ready to do those race pieces. And by pieces, we mean a defined unit of either time or distance that's going to be at a higher intensity. And that could be rates anywhere from something like, it could be 23, 24, all the way up through to 36 above, depending on how long those pieces are. So shorter and higher normally go together, lower and longer normally go together. And you're going to use your voice in a different way depending on which component of that training session you're in. So when you're in the warm-up, how you use your voice will be different to how you use your voice during the pieces. So having to think about that is important. And then what's really cool is when we think about racing, it actually brings these three things together. So you have your steady element, tech, and a little bit of pieces that all come into your race warm-up or your pre-paddle. A bit of steady rowing is going to come into your cool down. And so we're thinking about key themes that have generated a real return of investment, a real return of the input, the processes that you've put in that's created the biggest speed changes, the biggest bang for your buck. Those key themes you're going to carry into your racing. And so you carry them into the technical element that you bring into your race plan. You carry them into the type of exercise that you do in your warm-up. And you carry them into how you use your voice to both articulate and provide tone and intonation to the calls in which you're providing within the boat. And Sasha's going to start to give you a little bit of a breakdown now of some examples of how these sessions might look different.
Yeah, so as Morgs has said, she has started off with a really, really cool overview, and I'm going to take you into a little bit more of what a session might look like from the coxing seat. So, for example, a technical session, let's say you've got 10K scheduled, you might break it down, you yourself might break it down into this kind of format, because I think kind of the reason why we wanted to do this webinar and something that we, both of us, I think, have learned over time is that quite frequently you get given a program and it's all for like the rower's physiological benefit that they're doing these sessions or their technical benefit, etc., etc. But as a Cox, what can you do in that session to make you better? So this is our kind of take on what you might do in a technical session. So, you've been told we're doing 10K tech today. What are we going to do from that? And this is an example of how we might break it down. So, for example, you've got your first 2K as a warm up and you're going to build from the back in sixes. Then you might decide that 2K, you're doing steady state at rate 18. Again, as Morg said, sometimes in technical sessions, you might not have that moment of steady state. It might be really focused on drills and skills. But for example, if it was a longer session, you might want to chuck in some steady state in there. And then you might stop and have some time to do some roll ups, some taps, some strikes. And then you might have another section of steady state so that you can really consolidate those skills that you've built within the technical aspect. And then going on from that, you might have another 2K where you go back to the drill. So it's kind of like you're working as a Cox. You want to have a really clear idea in your head of what you're actually going out to achieve in that technical session, but how you're going to break it up. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the rest of the slideshow, but part of your role as a Cox in these technical sessions and steady state sessions is using that chunking up of your session to keep the rowers really engaged and motivated. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But we're going to go into the steady state session. So again, looking to chunk it out. So for example, if you've got an 18K session, you might see it as 4K warm up and then 2 6Ks continuous. And as Morgan says, in a team, they're very hot on their quick spins at either end, making sure the heart rate stays up, and then followed on by a 2K cool down. And again, as a Cox, 2 6Ks continuous, a question I get asked more than most is, how do I keep talking during that time? So we're going to go through a couple of things where maybe some key differences and key strategies that you could put into place in those steady state sessions. And then moving on to race day. Or pieces. So for example, you're going to be told that you're likely going to be told that you're doing three 2K pieces within a 16K session as a coach, is that's what they're going to tell you. So this is how, as a Cox, you might try to split it up. So your 4K race warm up, as we said, maybe in sixes, you're going to chuck in a couple of bursts, and then you're going to have your, that's your prep. And as Morgan said earlier, maybe in that 4K warm up, getting ready for the pieces, the way you're coxing is almost you're gradually increasing that intensity along the way. So you've pushed off and we'll talk about this in a moment, but you might be more calm. You might be in that alter ego where everything is a little bit more relaxed and you're kind of guiding the rowers and reminding them of these technical skills that you've built up in your tech session or your steady state session. But then as you go into your burst, you're going to start increasing your intensity within your voice, within your energy, within everything that you've got in that coxing seat to get you ready for that piece. So that when you hit the piece, that 2K at rate 26, 28, 30, you're up there on your race day level, if that makes sense. And again, I won't read out all of the words on the slides because I'm sure you can all read them. But as you go out of a piece and into a piece, you're going to go from up to down to up to down. And hopefully that kind of gets across what we might be trying to speak about in this webinar. So yeah, I think we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. And then race day. So as I said, kind of on the last slide already, and as Morgan has already addressed on race day, it's kind of an amalgamation of everything that you're doing. So your steady state comes in there, your technical aspects come in there. You might start with a pre-paddle, which is thinking about getting the crew into the right frame of mind for their race day and what they want to achieve on race day. So that pre-paddle might consist of a little bit more of that technical aspect, and it's not necessarily a technical session, but you might have one or two drills where you've gone, I know that gets my crew in the right position, so you're going to have a tech aspect in there. And then, as I said earlier, with your pieces within your race warm-up, you're starting on that level that you might have at steady state, and then with your physiological priming of your bursts, your progressions, anything that you add in there to get the crew physiologically able, you yourself as well are bringing it up from your steady state to your race day Cox. You're increasing with intensity so that when you race, you're that new person, and then there might be a cool down after where you can slip back into your steady state mode. So yeah, so moving on.
So when we think about how we set ourselves up to Cox in these sessions, we've got a good overview of kind of like how they actually almost crescendo and build up and lead into our whole race day performance. Now, what we want to start to think about is specifically what we're doing in those different types of sessions or different types of scenario. So in a steady session, you really want to think about what's your objective. Now, the primary objective as a Cox is to put the boat in the best possible position to allow the rowers to do their best rowing. And that incorporates the elements of safety and trying to steer. But it's also thinking about, right, what is the purpose of this long, steady row? Well, the purpose is to build endurance, to build the physiology and build the connected length of the rowers within the boat. And that comes into the framework of where we're trying to maintain hull speed in the middle of the race, and we do that through connected length and rhythm. And so rhythm is a product of what we're doing between the drive and the recovery. If you've got the connected length, you're going to have rhythm. And so we can use different technical elements and technical drills to try to build that up. And that's where we can lead into and add elements or kind of layer up our steady and our tech sessions. When we're thinking about how we're using our voice over these long sessions, there is the element of calm, we're instructional, and we're trying to provide constructive feedback, but you also want to be a little bit more varied. So using moments of silence, moments where you pause, give the rowers a job to do, and then you can take the time to see or feel if that change has happened. And so even now I've changed the speed that I've been talking at, I've added some pauses in, and we've changed the rhythm in which you're listening and you're moving with the conversation. And then you might come back in again and speed up a little bit quicker and be like, this is a really nice change and we're building momentum, we'll move forward, holding that speed but one beat lower. And so thinking about playing around with different ways in which you use your voice and the rhythm in which you speak to keep those rowers engaged is really important. And those steady sessions are your playground. That is your time to try something new, try something out. It's also a great opportunity for you to monitor the conditions. And that means taking the time to almost sit quietly. They're focusing on a change, a task, that unit of time. You can look ahead and try and see the wind shadows. Think about the direction in which the wind is coming. Is it coming towards stroke side first? Does that mean it's going to push it down to bow side? Is it a headwind? Do they need to square later? Is it going to be a cross head? Maybe it's going to take stroke side out first, push us down to bow side. We might need bow side to squeeze up through the finish. Stroke side be a little bit more forgiving. And we want the whole crew to square a bit later. So you start to layer up your ability to identify possible areas that could slow you down and turn them into areas of opportunity. So there is always a process that is going to help you to move through a situation better than anybody else, or to continue to maintain your maximum hull speed. And these steady sessions are a great time to start to identify and learn what those are. And so what are we looking for? Look, listen and feel, and that kind of regards to, you need to be looking around you, looking for technical changes, you're looking for obstacles, other crews, you're looking for where the river goes, you're looking at the wind. You want to listen to the sound of the boat, you can listen to the wind, you can listen to the way the water's moving, the sound of the way the water releases off the blade through the finish. And you want to try and feel what the hull's doing. So you can get to the point when you're coxing that you can feel what people are doing in different seas. And that's our goal. We want to get our boat feel that far in the future. And we start by identifying small things. And that might just be the sensation when their catches are in time in comparison to the sensation of the hull when their catches aren't in time. And so forming those associations with a technical process is how you're going to develop your boat feel. Sitting quietly is a great time to do that, and steady sessions are a good time, good to kind of practice those things. We spoke about how you use your voice, changing its tone, changing the speed in relation to the session, but also trying to keep them engaged. Trying to use different types of language to describe the technical changes that you're looking for. And sometimes it might feel like you're throwing a lot of things against the wall and seeing what sticks. People respond to different verbal cues. It's about finding what those cues are. And when we say chunking the sessions out, that's about how we break it down. So that might be 2K warm-up, that might be our 2x6 clay blocks, giving everybody in the crew a clear objective or clear lap. If you were running, it'd be a lap sequence, allows you to focus better. And then these sessions are a great time to continue to build that moral support and the rapport within the crew. So you want to learn what it feels like at different ends of the boat. You know, how does it feel to the stroke seat? How does it feel in the bows? And on the turn, it's a good time, if they're quick and efficient, to ask these questions. Sash, I'll let you take over for the pieces and racing.
Brilliant. So we're going to go to the flip end of it. So we've spoken about steady state, and we've spoken about how you might be, you know, as Morgan says, your energy, your tone. There are lots of different aspects that you're going to run at a steady state level. Now, when you're coxing a piece or a race, you're kind of stepping into a slightly different role. It's like an alter ego, ever so slightly, because your role is going from the endurance based and looking at the pernickety 1% details of someone rowing to going, how can I maximize my entire boat being fast? How can I get my 8 individuals or 4 individuals or whatever boat you're in, how can you get that whole hull running at the maximum speed across the finish line? And a lot of that is to do with executing your race strategy and making tactical decisions. So We've gone from maybe thinking having the time and having the space and having, all the time in the world to make our decisions and all the time in the world to look around us, to having to really look and assimilate information and get it out within the space of a couple of seconds or minutes when you're racing a 2K race. So when you're looking at your role as a Cox in this setting, you're thinking really high energy and intensity. But having said that, which we will speak about on the next slide, there are similarities within your steady state role in that you do still want it to be varied. You want to be able to have a crescendo where I think crescendo is the right word, where you go and then you gradually build and then you can come back down and then you can build again and then you can come back down. So in terms of your role as a Cox, it is changing, but there are more similarities than differences, we would say, as our take on it. So your communication style might be a little bit more commanding, might be a little bit more concise, and also might be a little bit more decisive. So if we think about what we're actually looking for from the boat, just go to the next slide. Perfect. So as I said, your communication might be a little bit more commanding, a little bit more confident, and a little bit more decisive. Okay. Now, your technical adjustments, you have used your descriptive language. However, although you've used your descriptive language, I put it on there, but it's what I'm saying there is that you might have built up certain calls in your steady state vocabulary that you're then going to use on race day, if that makes sense. So although you're not going to sit there and go, okay, we're really going to guide that blade in by doing this, it might be that there's a buzzword that you've used during that descriptive language. You've said something like pinch, or you've said something like grip, or you've said something like bite. Those were words that I started using in my steady state sessions that I then brought into my race day, where if I was saying for the first 250, I wanted to work on the catches, instead of taking my time with it, I was going, I know that the crew have heard me say pinch. I know that they're going to react to this. So it's about bringing that descriptive language that you've used in your steady state sessions, making it concise, and then bringing it into your race role as a Cox. Now, on race day, as we've said with steady state, you've built your morale, you've built your trust within the crew, and you've also built a good psychological understanding of your athletes in your steady state role. When you're on race day, it's your time as a Cox to sit in that seat and bring the crew together, because they're all going to have really different physical and emotional focuses. And I think as you jump in and out of different crews, you'll realize that every single person is completely different on race day. They all want a different thing on race day, and they need to kind of all come together in that moment. And that's your role as a Cox. So on race day, you are deciding to be really commanding, really decisive, but you're also being the one person that can bring the crew together and keep them focused and keep them on it in that moment in time. And part of that is also the confidence and trust you've built with your crew in steady state sessions on race day can come together. So as we said, during your warm up, you're going to start building up to that mode. If it takes for you as a Cox to have that steady state version of you in the warm up, and then maybe once you're attached to a stake boat or you're on a start line for head race, I know that we're slightly between race seasons at the moment. If it takes that when you're on that stake boat for you to take a deep breath and relax and almost slip into maybe race day Cox mode, where you are that commanding, confident, decisive person that can really bring these 8 individuals together, then that's what it takes. And that's something that I used to do. So something that I used to do on race day was I almost in my warm-up was maybe a little bit quieter, a little bit calmer on the way up. But then when I sat on the start line, I would have a moment to myself where I would go, okay, now you are the person in control and you are the person that's the best person to get this crew from start to finish. So that commanding nature, that confident nature, and that decisive nature can really come from you within that moment in time. And you're also looking to adapt to real-time conditions. But as you can see, a lot of the things we put on this slide, you've actually built in steady state training. So our main take home from this, and we will talk about this in a moment, is that you are building all of these skills on race day in your steady state rowing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about pieces and race day, I think one of the best ways to maximize your development and skill sets is to treat pieces like they're races. And then you're practicing how you'll perform on race day. There are many Coxes who Cox pieces really quite differently to how they cox on race day. And then they come unstuck because they're more under pressure or they are doing something they haven't done before. And rowing is all about repeating the thing you want to do as many times as you can. And so practicing it at any opportunity is really important. And this is a little kind of matrix of how you might use your voice and in what situation and why you might do that. So I'll take a few examples. You know, the obvious one we know of is about being kind of calm and measured, and you might use that in your warm-ups, technical stuff, steady rowing. And it says here about, you know, reinforcing technique. And I think that something that's really important to think about is you're also going to use your calm and measured but very direct talking voice on race day and in pieces in between your aggressive and your louder calls, because you're going to reinforce something you've asked them to do. You're going to reinforce that technical change you're looking for. You're going to reinforce and inform them of where they are on the track. You know, we are moving, we're 2 seats up, coming into the 1,000. We need to step on by springing off the catch. And then you might be more aggressive when you give them the job to do and when you say go. When we're thinking about kind of moments where we might sound a bit more urgent or be a bit quicker and sharper in our instructions that we give, that might be when we're either, you know, under pressure and you are on the front foot and it's an opportunity for you to step forward. You know, the word now is a very direct and instructional word to use. There's no misinterpreting that. But it might also be in a way in which in the start sequence that you're saying quite sharp words, and saying words quickly and snappy and sharp is a way in which you can make the rowers move how you want them to move. So you wouldn't be saying things like smooth or easy in the early parts of the start sequence. The Aussies are a great example of this. They actually kind of use sounding words to instruct the rowers to do what they want. So they might say chip on the catch and they'll say finish at the finish. So they might be like chip, finish. And that's how they're kind of creating the speed and the direction of the catch in those start sequences. So feel free to either take a screenshot or we can kind of share these things. They'll be on the YouTube upload anyway. And then a little bit I'll go into here. So we want to think about differences that might be there and how we might bridge those gaps. So main differences really between steady sessions and our pieces or racing is that the intensity is varying. And the varying intensity is an element which is happening more on the pieces sessions or in race day. But the important thing for you to remember is that it's never going to be something that you haven't done before. So there will be moments of the steady rowing in a session that's got pieces in it. There's going to be elements of the aggression, of the work intensity that you do in pieces that you're going to do in racing. So the idea is to end up in a situation where you sit on the start line on race day and you don't need to do something you haven't done before. Having a think about the different communication style you might use and having that be relative to the type of session that you're involved in or the race that you're in. So we don't want to be kind of lackadaisical in a racing situation. We don't really want to be that anyway, but you might not talk as slowly or as stretched out and easygoing on race day, unless you're maybe 6 slants up, open water and moving away, you know. And then the speed at which you're making decisions. So there's a lot more time during a steady session to feel the boat, think about the change you want to make, and then ask those technical adjustments or ask for a little bit more press from the crew. When you're racing, that happens a lot quicker. And so thinking about our key sets of, we want our visual awareness, we want to be able to feel the boat, we want to be able to know where we are in our race plan and know where we are on the track, and doing our visual sweep. So looking all the way from our left, around, in front, all the way to our right and behind. It's going to allow you to see what's going on. You'll see the wind. You'll see where you are on the track. You'll see what position you're in. And those things help to inform your decision making and help you to make quick decisions. Trying to bridge that gap and bring it all together, we want to be confident going into these scenarios. So sometimes in a pre-paddle or sometimes in a race warm-up, it can be a little bit overwhelming. What's important to remember or to be mindful of is, again, you've done these things before. And there'll always be a plan, or you should have a plan. And if your coach hasn't given you a plan for your pre-paddle, your coach hasn't given you a plan for your race warm-up, go and find them and sit down with them. It's not going to take too long to write it out. A race warm-up can be as simple as, you'll push off the dock, you're going to row in sixes, go through a legs-only progression. Once two sets of sixes have gone through from legs only all the way to full slide, you'll row full slide for a little bit. You go through a few bursts, you might do a minute at pace, and then you're going to do a few starts. That sort of thing becomes second nature after a while. And it might be longer or shorter depending on how far you're racing. If you're only doing 750, you won't have to do as long a warm-up. If you're doing 2K, probably going to want to prime that body and get it physiologically ready for racing itself. Think about how long it might take your crew to respond to you. So a more experienced crew that you spent more time with are going to respond quicker to you in training and in racing than a novice crew or a crew that you just jumped into. So being clear in what you're looking for, being clear in your instructions is really important. When you're coxing a crew that you've coxed before, you know the things that have worked in training. You've already established essentially what your race calls are going to be from all of the training that you've done. And so it's a little bit easier to know what it is that you might say or that you are going to say. When you just jump into a crew for a race, take the time to ask them what they've been working on, what works for them. Have they got a plan? And that same strategy works for if you're doing seat racing and you get swapped or new rowers jump into your boat when you're doing seat racing. Ask them what's been working, ask them for things that they've been focusing on, and then you can focus on those things and build the calls around that. And that feeds into building that kind of resilience and trust within the roles in both scenarios. So being confident in your abilities is going to elevate how you present yourself, which is going to allow the rowers to build more trust in you. In the same way that spending time in sessions, long miles, going through the whole structure of the training program day to day, that is also going to build trust within that crew. Sash, over to you.
Okay, so the main thing, I guess, that most people come for are actionable strategies. So what can you do now when you go back to your steady state sessions, your technical sessions, to prepare you for being at 100% on race day? So 4 points here. So things that we've mentioned already. So developing your situational awareness and your adaptability skills. And on the next slide, we will go through a couple of things that you could maybe practice. But the first things that come to mind there, as Morgan has already kind of touched on, is developing your ability to adapt to what conditions or whether you're up or you're down in a race. So as I say on the next slide, I'll give you an idea on what you may do to develop that. Another thing that we've mentioned, practicing effective communication styles for each setting. So as we've already touched on ever so slightly, thinking about how you're going to be on race day, not being a completely different person to how you've been in your steady state or technical session. So really practicing what you want to deliver on race day. And as we said, if it is those short, sharp calls that are sounding that if you're mapping out the sounds that you want, if that's what's going to get your crew across the finish line first, you've got to be practicing them in steady state paddling as well, or in your pieces, so that you don't turn up on a day. And I think slightly different on a tangent, but very relevant, I think that we could both say with confidence that every cox is going to have, like, I think when you become a cox that's done things for years and years and years on end, you realize that on race day you're not really pulling out anything new at all, and you might have one or two calls that are your, like, your big whip calls that you haven't said in the past, or they're the really motivational, inspiring. I know that Morgan's got a few of those in her back pocket, but most of your calls are the things that you said in steady state. So making sure your crew's ready to hear them so you can get maximum response from them. And then, as we've already said, building trust and understanding within the crew. So I think a really big thing about being a Cox on steady state and race day is that in steady state, the rowers are training, yes, endurance, they're training their physiological self, but they're also training their mind a lot. Like, it's a lot of miles in a steady state session, and they are, there's going to be a point for everyone, like where you get to a point where you're like, gosh, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And they need to stay engaged, they need to stay motivated. And that's when you're building your trust and understanding with the crew, because you're the person sat in that seat during those steady state sessions going, yeah, guys, you're doing really well, and we're going to go on to the next point, and we're going to go faster, and we're going to make this all worth it. So it's those steady state sessions, taking that time to build that trust with them when they're training their mind and their body for a long period of time. And just finally, something that we're quite big on at WOX, and we've all done, is reviewing and learning from our past sessions and races. So something that I think we're hopefully trying to change the narrative on is just having that ability to step out of a session, no matter if it's a steady state session or a technical session or a race, and having some time to reflect on what you've done in that session so that you can improve on the next session. So if that's coming off your steady state session and yes, crew feedback, but also analyzing yourself, going, okay, within that 12K session or that 16K session or 20K session, how do I feel like I did at keeping the crew buoyant? How do I feel I did at chunking out that session and keeping it focused? How do I think I could make myself a little bit better at keeping my crew engaged in the next session? And I know I've had times where I've had to really sit down and think about what I could maybe change in a next steady state session so that it's not lost in training. And the same with races. And I think with races, it's always more, you're always more quick to reflect on a race because there's a result at the end of it. So you've got that outcome measure where you've either, I guess at Henley, it's literally like winning or losing a race, or in a 6-lane race, you may have medalled or you haven't medalled. And I think that tangible outcome measure always results in reflection. However, I think as a Cox, it's really important just to start reviewing and learning from any session that you might be whatsoever. So yeah, and on the next page, these are a couple of strategies that I think could embody what we've just discussed. So in your steady state sessions, use the changing conditions to simulate race day conditions. So if it is a cross headwind, that's probably something that's going to crop up at Adwani when you are in your 6-lane race. Use that as an opportunity to kind of, as we've said, you have more time to be silent in steady state. You have more time to make your decisions. So take 10 minutes of that session to feel what the boat's doing, like where it's being blown to, how maybe you need to adjust yourself to stay where you want to be and how you're going to manage the boat. And also take some time to realize how the crew is reacting to that change. So some crews might find it really hard they might get blown off with a gust. And then that if that happens on a day, you might have to adapt to that crew to get them at their best state on race day. So use the conditions around you and take the time that you have in a steady state session to really try and hone in some techniques to get better at those. Situational awareness. So Morgan has touched on it a little bit in terms of looking around you, and every time you have a piece, you want to be setting yourself up for race day. But another way to do it is if you don't have a piece, or if you don't have a side-by-side fixture day with another crew where you're put under pressure, it's still really good to use race visualization to prepare for race day. So even within a steady state session that's like 16K, 18K, I quite frequently would say, like, okay, guys, for this 7K, we're actually going to pretend we're racing the head, and we're going to think about what we're doing within this 7K to get ourselves across that finish line on the day. Or, for example, for a 2K race, you could say, we're going to run through our race plan, and it doesn't need to be over 2K. You could run through your race plan over 6K, but just split those chunks up into regions that you want to focus on. And I think the base of what we're saying is that you really want your steady state to inform your race day and make sure that you're the best possible Cox. And what better way to prepare than kind of map out a situation in your head before it's already happened? And it will really help your your decision making on the day. It will really help you do it quickly. So for example, you could literally go through and be like, we're actually 5 lengths down, guys. what are we going to do? We're going to have to go a bit faster. But you've already reacted to that. So if on race day you are 5 lengths down, which has happened to me before, if you are 5 lengths down, you know what you're going to do to change. And the crew knows that you might get a little bit more excited, or your tone is going to change. Something's going to change within you to get your boat going faster. So practice those situations. Likewise, as Morgan said earlier, if you end up being a couple of lengths up, your energy within the crew might not get as excited as before, but your crew will know that, because your crew will see that you're actually going to tailor it to keep it and wait to use it in the future if you need to. So like basically just using every opportunity you can to simulate race day. As I said, reading the crew, so that's part of building the trust. So use the time that you have in those longer sessions to work out how different people might present if they're fatigued. You know, some people might actually get a bit moody. Some people might just be really tired. Some people might be really loud. Some people might be really quiet. It's understanding those different nuances so that when you're on race day, you know that 7:50 in, one of your crew members might actually really like to hear this to help them get over the finish line. And then you can really put that into action on race day. And as we've already said, I won't repeat this, but just treating everything that you do at a high intensity as race day to ensure you're ready for it. So yeah.
And some final kind of bits from us really is that we hope that the message has been quite clear that actually you don't just sort of show up on race day and kind of pluck something out of nowhere and that's that. It's that actually the way we go about doing training within rowing, it's training because it's preparing us to race. And there are different types of sessions in which we do, whether they're steady, whether they're technical, whether it's steady tech and pieces, whether they're short and sharp, whether they're long and steady. It's all forming the basis and the foundations of what's going to go into both our race plan, but also how we conduct ourselves, how we articulate ourselves, how we manage the fleet, how we work with and collaborate with our team. So no one just shows up on race day and kind of wings it. There's a real element of using what you've already learned, using things that you know, going through that filing system within your brain. I always think of the Bruce Almighty. No, is it Bruce Almighty? Yeah, Bruce Almighty, and that filing cabinet comes flying out. I always think about that. If that's what it's like inside your head, you're kind of going through and picking the right one out. And this one that I've picked out is, oh, this is crosshead tail, the classic Dawdy wind. We've got a crosswind, a headwind, and a tailwind all at once, depending on where you are. And then you know how to deal with that. So building your repertoire day in, day out is what's informing your racing. And then you can use and maximize each session to refine, to develop, to improve, to reflect the skills that you and your crew need in order to be the fastest that you can be, the fastest that they can be, that you as a collective, and you're maintaining that focus of we're trying to build our optimum boat speed. Optimum boat speed is existing within training, it's existing in steady state. There's an optimum boat speed for technical stuff. There's an optimum boat speed for a headwind or a tailwind or flat conditions, pushing and working towards that to stay on that task. And having the confidence in those things lets you put the boat in the best possible position so that you guys can do your best rowing. And we're going to pause here nicely for a moment for some questions. I am going to attempt to or be able to let you in to actually ask some questions. But you might have to bear with me whilst I fix that. I have to pause the screen share. But here's the Buyers Coffee link if you're looking for that. And I'm actually going to stop the screen share. Stop sharing. And then we're going to test my Zoom skills to see if I can enable the chat function.
Yeah, I think you've done it.
Okay, I think you guys can ask some questions now. So feel free to ping those in. they could be anything really weird and wonderful about coxing, all things measured. And hopefully that's been helpful for you guys. I'm going to make you all stay on the Zoom until one person asks a question. Yes, here we go.
How does your race plan change for coastal versus river races? Wow.
Very, very interesting.
Such a good question.
When we say coastal, do you mean beach sprints or like Penarth? I'll kind of explain both. So
Pants and Dorset
Dorset
style.
style. Interesting. Okay, so let's go through a few kind of different scenarios. So obviously, when the blade is in the water, that's going to create leverage and that's going to move the boat. The challenge with coastal rowing is that you don't know where a wave is going to form or how it's going to form. And so putting the blade in the water gets a lot harder. And I think it's about having verbal cues that you use to help the rowers change the way in which they're moving or they're rowing so that they can get their blades in the water and take their best strokes. You're going to need to stay calm and relaxed because it can get stressful quite quickly. Remembering that there is a process to be able to execute anything or any scenario that you're in. And I think it's similar in the way that the training that you do is informing what you say in the race. So the training that you've done on the sea in those kind of coastal areas is what's informing what you'll do and say when you're racing on the sea. When you're on the river and you're training on the river, the training that you do there is going to inform how you cox when you're racing on the river. So each thing is relevant to the training area in which you do it in. You could get a bit creative and make your coach make a lot of wake when you're on the river, and it's a bit of both.
I find it.
I think as well is building on commonalities that you know. So there will be common things that you can take into both that can help. And the roughness of the sea is, again, remembering that when the blades are in the water, you'll have more control. But if you can have a longer stroke or a longer period of time in which you're actually able to create leverage, that's going to help you. It might sometimes be a case of, depending on which end of the boat the wave is caught, you might adjust which end of the stroke that you're focusing on. So if the bow isn't in any water and the stern's in a lot of water, you're probably going to want to really sit back at the finish, try and sink the bow down. If the bow's in a lot of water and the stern's not in much, you're probably going to want them to really get the catches in because that's the only point where they're going to try and find some water. So having a think about the part of the stroke and how you might be able to shift your body weight to change how the boat is running or floating, I guess, when it's been absolutely taken by the sea. My only other weird and wonderful experience was doing the Tunnel Cup, which actually got cancelled after it was raced, which was a race from Hammersmith Bridge to somewhere in central London. It was 10 kilometres long all the way down the Thames. And the wash was so bad that it would be stern fore would be in the water and bow fore would be in the air, or bow fore would be in the water and stern fore would be in the air, or middle fore would be in the air and stern pair and bow pair would be in the water. And that was a case of whoever was near the water to just get their blade in it. So sometimes you've got to be a bit creative. Trying to stay relaxed, I would say, is a big win. And the chances are you will have been in a scenario that will help you to find a way out. And if you haven't been in a scenario and you find yourself in a new one, it's a great learning opportunity. If you just stay relaxed, then you'll learn something as you go. Our survival instinct is pretty cool.
How can you fast call? Yeah. I get this. I get this. I understand that. So and to be honest, I actually think I struggled with this so much when I was first, like, I feel like I still do to some extent. I think when you
read the question, Sash.
Oh, sorry, yeah. How can you best call for more control or relaxation on the recovery during a race without damaging the intensity you're trying to build through other calls? I've been struggling to find the right balance of calls to ensure both control and working hard, but it can often come across as a bit overwhelming and confusing for the rowers. I hope this makes sense. Totally does make sense. And I think that is I've actually recently been sitting in boats. I don't cox much anymore, but I have recently been sitting in junior crews, which are actually really, really, really junior. And we're still working on we're still working on ratio within our racing. So we're still working on keeping that recovery nice and smooth, but making sure we get it on with the legs. And you are right in that I think as a cox, it is really hard because I think sometimes when you think you're dialing it down a little bit, you run into the risk that maybe the pressure dials down with it, if that makes sense. However, I think this is where you have that moment off where we explained where steady state and racing do come hand in hand. I think it's absolutely fair, and I do this, to have a period of time where you are like, yeah, we're moving, we're on with the legs now, going, going, going. And it's absolutely okay to take a stroke or two of pause and to go, okay, guys, just I think we could tailor I think we could relax on the recovery, focus in, let's do it in these three strokes, ready, go. Like it's okay to come down and then give them that moment, give them those 5 strokes, tell them if they have made the change. And if they have made a change, you go, yep, perfect. Now we go again, kind of vibe. So it's absolutely okay to come down and go back up. And I know that kind of contradicts what you've said to me, that you said that you're finding it hard to do that. However, I think having maybe a stroke of silence or 1 or 2 strokes of silence shows the crew that you are making that shift from maybe slightly more energetic to quieter. And it is something, again, that I would play with in your bursts now. So I would maybe try a couple of bursts when you're next on the water. And I would I'd say to the crew, I think that if I feel like we're wheel spinning or I feel like the recovery is just out of control and we're slightly in panic mode and we're not going anywhere and I need to make a change, this is what I'm going to say. And then practice that. Have a stroke where you're taking that stroke to really feel the boat and you go, yeah, no, not working. Okay, guys, just focus in on me. We're going to pin it out round the back end and make sure we rock over. We'll separate out the finish. Ready, go. Give them 3 strokes to react and be very decisive with what you're saying there. You're saying you want the rate down by the recovery being separated. Ready, go. Give them 3 strokes to react. Tell them whether they've done it and then go back into your big excitement. And yes, you are right. It depends what crew you have. Some crews will react really fast. Some crews won't react very well to that. But if you practice it in steady state and you give them that opportunity to get better at practicing it, then by race day, you'll have a good strategy to work. That's how I would do it. Morgs might have more to put on top.
Yeah, I think as well, and this takes a bit more skill, is as in like a skill within your coxing repertoire, is trying to identify where or why it might feel rushed. And it's something I would call a lot or think about a lot when I was racing is encouraging people to make sure they've come around the pin at the front. So when we're racing, we tend to shorten up our catch length. And we want to make sure that whether we're in a quad or if we're in the 8s or in the 4s, if we're sweeping, your length is quite long at the front. All of our length in front of the pin is going to be really advantageous. If you lose even half a turn of the wheels, the leverage and the speed that you can generate, but also the rhythm and the ratio is going to change completely. So by simply being like, it might be like, okay, guys, like we're coming through the 500, like we're 3 seats up, we're on a 36. Over these next 3 strokes, I want you to come around the pin. On this one, go. Right, that's 1, yep, 2, come right out to me, 3, yes, there we go. And then you can be like, that's the rhythm. And so sometimes you have to guide them out to rhythm you want. In the same way of coming around the pin for the catch, that might be something they need to do at the finish, that they might need to sit back and complete the stroke. So whenever we would transition, or I'm in a crew and we're trying to drive the transition, It's thinking about they've got to really sit back and complete. So that means the legs drive down, their body's going to open up, their heels are going to be down, and they're sitting back in their hip angle. So they've gone from this to this, and sitting right back and pushing in the heels is going to change the rhythm. It's going to make it more like a, when you ride a bike on a big cog, the big gear, it's like, ugh. But when you transition in the rhythm, you've got to think about you going from spinning, and then you're going to step onto the big gear, and they've got to really sit back on it. And you could use that call in different parts of the race. You know, you could be coming through 1250 and be like, right, guys, we're coming into the final 750 here. I need you to sit right back on it. And then how you've said it and how you've drawn it out is going to, again, change the rhythm that you're looking for. So thinking about why it is that it feels rushed, where does it need to change, can help you out.
Yeah, we've got 2 more that have come into the chat. Hopefully that's helpful, Kirsty, and we're always here if you want to message us on Instagram as well. So yeah.
Okay, so we've got another one. How do you balance asking your crew for input and being decisive and commanding? I would say this is a very top quality skill to have. It's applicable to many walks of life. So it's a great life skill, transferable skills, a hot topic at the moment. But I would say at the end of a chunk or a block of a steady session is a great time to ask. Decide who you're going to ask. You know, right, guys, stern fall. How does it feel? How does it feel to you in that last section of the track? And then allow them to start giving their feedback. By the time you've spun, you want that feedback consolidated and be like, great, okay, right, from the finish, get set, ready, go. And then, right, we're going to work on this. And the next end, you might ask the bow for something like that. Make sure you ask different ends of the boat. We don't want to only know one end, you know, rather than never asking them in the bows. Often the people with really good fine feel and touch are going to be in the bows, because you could feel a lot more of what's going on there. Typically in the 3 and 4 seat, they're going to give you information about the transference of the rhythm, because they're going to feel that from the drive, the power and the push. The more touchy-feely technical things, they probably don't feel them as much because they're in the widest part of the boat down there. It feels a bit more like they're rowing a barge. So there's different things. You start to get to know what type of feedback you might get from different seats. And that doesn't mean by asking for feedback, you're not losing your command. It's a collaborative effort. The skill of the Cox is being able to listen to that feedback, consolidate it, and then provide the processes to turn that input into an output.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely, as Morg said, like I think having, as particularly if you're on an 8 voices are a lot of voices to listen to. So setting the boundaries on who you want to hear from. As Morg says, so bow for, stern for, or if you are just like, I think at points I would just speak to my stroke person and I would almost mute my Cox box. I used to have a Cox orb and I could mute my Cox orb just to ask my stroke person how the rhythm was feeling or how something was feeling. So having an option like that is also, like, doing something like that is also an option to you. So if it's that you actually, because I think quite frequently when you're on a coxing seat, you're looking for a little bit of like, you know, you're feeling something, you've got something in your head, but you're just trying to get validation that what you're feeling is correct and that you are, you know, the rowers are feet, or you want a little bit more information from the rowers to tailor your calls, if that makes sense. So I think that having the boundaries on who you ask is a really good idea. And as Morg said, like, you're certainly not indecisive or incompetent. I spoke to a lot of athletes throughout my entire time, but I agree that having too many voices is a little bit overwhelming. So I think just boundaries on who you speak to.
Sometimes you've got to be like, lads, we've got too many cooks and you're spoiling the broth. And then you'd be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's that. And if they then carry chirping on, that's a problem with their understanding of actually the roles within a rowing boat. So that's more of a question of, are our objectives and shared goals in the same place, or are they in different places? Another good question is, how do you deal with negativity in a crew during a long session? And if things aren't going well and you're trying to pick up the focus and positivity of your athletes, how are we working around and doing that? And then it says that they find in poorer conditions, when energy's off, the crew has and the crew's dropped, it's difficult to see where they can call for changes and improvements. So I think this is something that we all go through, rowers, coxes, and coaches. As a coach, this is something that happens regularly. What I would say is remember why you're there. You're there because we want to make a boat go fast. And just start to think about things that you do know. What is our speed right now? Okay. Could it be a second faster? If it were to be a second faster, how might I make it one split quicker per 500? What's our catch timing like? Okay, it's not that good. Right, well, let's get that in check. Maybe they're not quite moving in time from the finish, and that's having an effect on everything later on in the stroke. So maybe we could do some drills that will help them consolidate their timing and positioning from the finish. It might be that you have a little word of the stroke seat while you're going along, and you either mute your Cox box or you pull your mic out the way, and you'd be like, "Hi mate, how you doing? Does it feel heavy?" Right, yeah, it looks like it feels heavy. And then they might laugh. And then be like, "Right guys, look, I think it feels pretty heavy right now. I think there's a few discs slipping. Have a little laugh about it, give them something tangible to work towards, split it into chunks." Sometimes I would be like, we'd be struggling, people would be tired, and we might sing a song, and you're thinking, who do you do this with? Some preschoolers, but this would be like in the Leander Women's 8 or the GB Women's 8, you might do the little, if you ever went to PGA, you'd be like, everywhere we go, like something like that. Anything that's going to boost morale, try it. You might start talking about Coronation Street. If you start telling a story, sometimes it gets quicker, sometimes it doesn't. You've got to think about what method of distraction might they need to act as a moment of break, a moment of breath. Sometimes rowing steady is really taxing and you're just really tired and you don't really want to keep doing it. So taking their mind off that can really help. Sometimes there's tiredness, and so the technique's got lazy, and that makes the boat heavier. If we can sit a little higher through the next few finishes and then be a bit springier in our feet, so all we take care of is just our own body weight, already it's gotten lighter and already it's easier to move the boat. When it's easier to move the boat, it's easier to keep the boat at that speed. So trying a few different things is what I would do.
Yeah, I think similarly, like I think this is a slight tangent to obviously what we've spoken about today, but listen, like I think part of being a Cox is bringing your personality into the crew as well. So like if it is feeling like that, don't be afraid to have your moment of just being yourself with the crew, because as I said earlier, like part of a steady state session is the rowers are training their minds and they're training how to get out of that in their heads. And so like that's your time to it's brilliant that you're noticing it, to be honest with you. It's brilliant that you've noticed that there's been a shift in energy, and then now you're looking for strategies on how to improve. And I think this is where I would reach for like I'd probably reach from like, these are the sessions where I would find a goal in mind. So as I was saying earlier, like I would maybe be like, okay guys, like it's 3 months until the head, we're going to now think about simulating the head in this leg of like on this lap of the river. And then you spin around and you might do it off time. You might be like, oh, the head's going to take us about 20 minutes, we're going to chunk it out over that 20-minute period, and then use the markers or use that as an opportunity to practice. If they're not I was never actually I never was on a club on Tideway, so I would use that as a chance to be like, these are the markers you might come across and that kind of thing. So having a goal within those longer sessions, which might be completely different to what they're used to. You might go, oh, we're actually going up to we're going past Barnes Bridge now, and this is where you're gonna be about this many minutes into the piece. You might be feeling this. We're gonna actually, instead of letting that fatigue get to us, we're gonna drive the finishes. Ready, go. And I would then give them those 10 strokes and be like, let's practice that for the next 10 strokes. And then you move on to the next bit and you go, okay, well, we might be about halfway through our piece now. We know that we are going to need to really think about driving the knees, that bit quicker, ready, go, that kind of thing, just to chunk it out a little bit more. And I think those are things that you can reach for, which also help you as a Cox, because I think sometimes in those longer pieces, if you do feel the energy has started to shift, it's very hard you yourself to be like, to keep the morale going. But if you give them a clear focus, then you've also got an outcome measure at the end of that. And you can go, yeah, guys, that was really good for that, like 6K. We built on something. Right, we're going to move on to the next 6K. Let's choose something else. Do you know what I mean? It gives you something to work off then and gives you an outcome measure that they can build off. Um, I think Morgan said most of the other stuff, to be honest. I think that's what I would reach for personally. Yeah.
All right, guys, that's probably going to be it from us. So thank you very much for coming. We're also going to put the recording up on our YouTube channel. But if you've got any other questions, please get in touch. You can either follow us and send us a message on our Instagram at the Winning Cox, or you can send us a email, thewinningcox@gmail.com. We've got a growing kind of team of individuals and teams and clubs who we're working with and we're coaching and we're developing at the moment, and it's really exciting to be a part of. If those are things that you're interested in and you're looking for some kind of one-on-one coaching, then please reach out and get in touch. Same goes for if you're looking for some group coaching and that sort of stuff. But this has been great. Thanks for coming along, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.